Well, good afternoon to all of you. We're coming here live from the Bryanston Country Club. I wanted to introduce a very good friend of mine and an expert from Australia. He's come all the way here, and we've had a very interesting week traveling around Australia, around South Africa. And to be honest, I've learned a tremendous amount from Peter, and what I wanted to do was just spend a short while and to ask him a couple of questions so that you too could gain and get the benefit of his knowledge and his experience. So just Peter, before we get started, I mean, who is Peter? You know, you become a friend of mine. I've known you for over 4 years, but what's your background, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my background is basically, I left school to be a golf pro and I failed, so I ended up going into sales and marketing, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that at a time when I worked for a big international company called Nabisco. I was in Nabisco for 15 years, and they sent me to South Africa, and I spent 3 years here between 1973 and 76 running Pirates Biscuits. And then I went back to Australia and got into the wine industry, where I was until about 10 years ago. Then my wife got me a job in real estate, and now I own a real estate company, and I work for the developers in Brisbane. A number of top developers such as Arden Property Group, RE Property Group, but basically I work for a select group of developers, and we sell apartment buildings in AAA investment locations within a 2 to 10 kilometre radius of Brisbane.
Something you failed to mention, or maybe I missed it, but I think it's quite important, is you did live in South Africa a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And that just, it was a long time ago, but it doesn't matter. You still understand the nuances and the culture and what people are looking for. And I think that certainly, I know for me, that's a huge benefit from our side,
Well, it is for me, because as an example, I went to Port Elizabeth Golf Club the other night, and it was like I hadn't been there for a week. So I think the two cultures get on extremely well. And I had 3 of the happiest years of my life here, so it has very good memories for me.
So now tell us, that's a little bit about yourself, so we understand you've been in a lot of business, you've been in property a long time, you've got your own business. What's happening in the economy there? What is it that excites you about the Australian economy, but also the bit of the government, the debt, in terms of the global financial crisis?
Well, we were very fortunate, and as the last Conservative government left the country in very good financial shape, with about $100 billion surplus. The worst government in Australia's history has just turned that into about a $250 billion deficit. The saving grace of that is the taxes that they have introduced and the regulation that they've imposed upon us is about to be reversed, because at the moment, with the current opinion polls and the scandals that they have going on, they'll be out of office at the next election by a substantial margin, which will free up a lot of business entrepreneurship. I mean, it's hard to know just how much, but the opposition has vowed to abolish the carbon tax, which the government imposed at a level much higher than Europe. They've vowed to abolish the mining tax, which is a drag on our most entrepreneurial companies. So I think there'll be a whole lot more letting business off the leash. There'll be a reduction in government waste and spending. So that's auguring well for Australia, particularly when we have a very resilient housing market because of the structure, unlike America and the UK.
Tell us a little bit about the economy. You've been talking about the resources and the mining and particularly what's going on in Queensland. At the end of the day, as an investor, I need to look at long-term trends. I need to understand what's going on and why it's going on. And also, from an economic point of view, I mean, some of our viewers won't be aware, but Australia was the only country in the G20 not to go into recession in 2009. Why is that? What's your opinion on that?
Well, again, it was because we had such good government for 11 years under the Conservatives led by John Howard. Secondly, Australia isn't called the lucky country for nothing. I mean, Western Australia and Queensland have enough resources for 1 trillion years. I mean, we have a country the size of the continental United States, and people just really don't understand how big Australia is. When they talk of non-renewable resources, well, it would be hard to imagine in 1,000 lifetimes that the resources in Australia would be exhausted. So we've got China with 1.6 billion people. We've got India with 1.3 billion people. There are 300 million people in China with cars. That's a country the size. That's the size of the United States there, with another 5 United States go to fill them up. So we're supplying uranium. We're supplying bauxite, we're supplying coal, seeing gas, we're supplying iron ore, and the great bulk of those products are coming out of Western Australia and Queensland. And specifically Queensland, because it's on the eastern seaboard, that's where all the business and commerce takes place. Western Australia is fine, but it's a very isolated place. It's costly to live there. It's costly to be there. So Queensland is where it's at.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I read something in The Economist about 3 months ago. You know, geography was Australia's worst enemy, and now it's its best friend in terms of where it's going and everything else.
Absolutely.
Now, tell me, I mean, what has changed over the last 10 years? And you know, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of over the last 10 years?
I think that not only the last 10 years, it's the Asian century, and as I said, the rise in China as an international power. It's now the factory for the world, which is having adverse effects on the manufacturing in the United States and Australia. But on the other hand, it's also providing a wonderful lifestyle for us in terms of the resources that they're buying from us. So we've now become really part of Asia, and if you have a look around Sydney at any time, it's basically an Asian city. So we've had huge migration from Asia, and of course that's bringing its own benefits in terms of the interaction between Asia and Australia. And not only that, it provides us with great advantages in exporting to China because we are there. That gives us great advantages over Brazil, for example, another big resource is exported because the cost of freight from there to China is infinitely greater than it is from Australia.
So I mean, if we look at the economy, I mean, you've got a sound government running the economy, you've got a resources-based economy, which is fantastic for where the world's going, you know, globally, etc. But let's talk a little bit about property. You know, at the end of the day, you've got sound economic government, you've got good, strong banking, top 4 banks in the top 15 in the world. But what about property? You know, a lot of people talk it up, talk it down. Tell us a little bit about the fundamentals. What's actually happening in the Australian market?
Well, I think you've made a number of points this week about Australia not being one market. I think a lot of people make the mistake of talking about the Australian market, and it isn't. You've got the Western Australia market, the Sydney market, Brisbane market, the Melbourne market, and they're all very different, structurally different. Sydney is extremely expensive because of topography and because of the lack of releases of land, high regulation and red tape that makes it extremely difficult to get projects off the ground, yet we have a high immigration program. So there's great demand for housing, and just this week there was an article in the Australian saying that we're 240,000 dwellings short of where we need to be. Now this is
So I just want to repeat that because that is fundamental. You know, what happened in America was that there were 10 million homes oversupplied, and it was supply and demand that got out of kilter. A market like London, you know, yes, they got into global financial crisis, but the supply and demand was still in kilter, and it took only 12 months for the market to get back. So just to reiterate, you're saying there's 240,000 homes where there's more demand than the supply
Absolutely.
can keep up with, basically.
And if you have a look at, if we say that the balanced rental market is 3%, because 1% is virtually zero, because there are people moving into houses and moving out of houses, the rental vacancy rate in Sydney is now 1.3%, in Brisbane it's 1.6%, Melbourne's 3%. It's the only balanced market in Australia. So rents are starting to become really a serious problem for people who have to rent homes. And of course the price of housing in Australia is very, very high. So, and investors supply most of the rental accommodation because the government do not invest in any significant way in public housing.
It's interesting. I'd say my greatest lesson I learned from the global financial crisis is that sophisticated high net worth investors are only interested in income. You know, capital growth is something that comes, it's a nice to have if you buy in the right areas, it will come with time. But income's what you can control. And that's why, for me, Australia really excites me. You know, with vacancies of less than, 1.5%, as you're saying.
Indeed.
And tell us a little bit that story about that investor with the 33 units that came online last week.
Well, that's right. We had a building finished last week of 68 apartments. There's still 20 left in it, but of the 33 investors that had purchased and put them in the hands of the building manager, the building was registered on a Monday, the manager started renting them on that day, and by Wednesday night all of those apartments had been taken, and at exceptionally high rents, between $430 a week and $460 for the one-bedroom apartments, and $530 to $570 a week for the two-bedroom apartments. So that's top rent, and that's unfurnished.
Yeah. No, look, it's fantastic. And I mean, as I said, as an investor, that's the key. You know, where's my security of income coming from? Because, if you're not getting income as a property investor, you have no investment. And more importantly, if you're investing at long distance, you need to be able to be sure that you're getting it. So this is not a Dubai example, where you might be getting a rental guarantee, whatever. It's not. It's the fundamentals of the market that are protected, and the demand is there, which I think is absolutely crucial. Tell us a little bit about the densification. As you said, that the market is changing. You've got your own personal story, living in an apartment. The dream of Australia was to live in homes out in the suburbs, and it seems to be changing. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's changed dramatically. I mean, first of all, Australia, like Europe, has got an ageing population. I myself had a large home with a swimming pool, etc., and as you've got older, the less maintenance you have, the better. So there is a great trend for older people like myself to move towards apartments. Not only that, like everywhere else, the traffic in the major capitals of Australia is absolutely horrific. So you can spend 2 hours going 40 k's at peak hours. So people are time poor. And on the other hand, you've got the younger generation who want to work and live where they play and work. So there is a big drive for those people to move into one-bedroom apartments. No longer do people get married at 22, have 3 kids by the age of 30 and buy a house in the burbs. It doesn't happen. So you need both the older generation and the younger people are looking to be close to amenities and facilities. And for the developers with whom I work, like the Arden group, their specialty is in building quality product close to amenities and facilities, and that's where you get top rents.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, having lived in London for 9 years, you know, the closeness you were to the tube station was one of the most critical things. And I think Australia's starting to wake up to that. I know that when you showed me Siana over 3 years ago, you told me how the city planning wanted to densify the city and put them close to transport nodes and everything. Absolutely. And it's quite interesting. I mean, that's a trend, and as an investor, you've always got to be aware of the trends and know what's going on in terms of what's happening.
Well, Siana is a perfect example. I mean, I own an apartment in there. I often buy apartments in the developments, and the Siana apartments is 134 apartments. All are 100% occupied. There's no vacancy till next July, and there is a waiting list. And I get $635 a week for my 2-bedroom apartment. It doesn't get any better than that, and it's a AAA investment location. And that's what Arden does. The Eden development is in a similar location, and we've already sold close to 100 of those, and we expect to have that well underway in the next few months.
Interesting. And I mean, tell us just from your perspective, you know, when one's looking at it, you know, you've mentioned Sydney, you've mentioned Perth and Melbourne, etc. Why Brisbane? You know, what is the? I know you've kind of touched on it, but tell us why in your mind.
There's a lot of advantages in Brisbane, not the least being that's where the bulk of the resources boom is happening. Massive infrastructure projects going on in Mackay and Rockhampton and Emerald. The mining companies are moving a lot of head offices up into Brisbane, which is providing demand for accommodation for investors. It's 100 k's from the Gold Coast. You can be in Surfers Paradise in 45 minutes. You can be in Noosa in an hour and a half. I mean, Brisbane is the fastest growing city in Australia.
Very interesting. And I mean, look, just to finish off, and it's been a real honour and a privilege to spend the last week with you, but why, you know, we've got two different sort of opportunities that we've been looking at. One is off the plan, where you've got the benefit of putting down a 10% deposit. You don't have to do anything for another 2 years, and then you've got a 2-year rental guarantee at 6%, so you've got security for another 4 years basically from today. And the nice thing is it's also a small amount of money up front to be able to get your foot in the door.
Indeed.
Some people like that, others say no, I want something existing. You've got Siana, it's an existing building, it's got an existing tenant, you know exactly what you're getting. You know, just tell us, 30 seconds, a little bit of a why you, I mean you own in both of them, but why those two? What are the nuances that you like about them?
AAA investment location. It's close to the railway line. It's close to schools. It's close to shopping centres. There's the biggest hospital in Queensland within 4 k's. It's close to the Suncorp Stadium. South Africans like that to play the rugby. It's close to all amenities and facilities. And the key to getting top rents in Brisbane or any other city for that matter is to be adjacent to amenities and facilities. And I can't keep repeating that enough. People are time poor, they don't have the time to sit in traffic for hours a day, and that's why apartments are now increasing at a faster rate of value than houses.
No, look, it's fascinating. I want to finish off with one story. Peter introduced me to a great friend of his, Bill, and Bill actually immigrated to Australia in 1999, and he actually had 4 apartments. He was a big developer here, and he was selling off his investments here in South Africa. And as they were selling them off, he owned 4 here in Johannesburg, and he went to his wife one night and he said, listen, you're not going to believe it, but we've just had our entire apartment stolen. So she goes, what are you talking about? He goes, no, you don't understand. We've lost the apartment, we've lost the land, we've lost everything. And she said, well, how the hell is it possible to actually have your apartment stolen, physically stolen? And he said, well, in the last week, the rand is devalued by more than 25%. And so of our 4 apartments, 1 is gone. And I think for us as South Africans, it's a balance of the two. Yes, we've got to understand the 5 most dangerous trends affecting all South Africans. And again, you can go and check out our webinar on that. But for me, once you understand that, you need to understand the fundamentals, you need to understand the nuances of the investment, but most importantly, you've got to get the right information and you've got to have the right partners. You've got to have people like you on the
Can I
ground.
just interrupt you? One of the things that really impressed upon me this week, which is stuck in my mind, which I hadn't realised the implication of that, is the combination of the rate of inflation in South Africa, the devaluation of the rand compared and with a widening gap between the strength of the Australian currency and the low inflation. It's something I hadn't considered, and that's a really big aspect of what's gone on this week that's stuck in my mind. It's a real degeneration of wealth for the South African people.
Well, I mean, the counter side of that same story from Bill was the friend of his who he gave $500,000 to, went and bought a commercial building, and 6 years later the building's paid off. He's earning $300,000 to $400,000 per year. He only spent $500,000 up front. Now he's earning a passive income of $300,000 to $400,000 with no expenses, and his building's worth $3.5 million net asset value. So it's you've got both sides of the equation, and the economics and everything really works in your favor. But as I said, and I want to reiterate it, they're good and they're bad stories. Over 80% of people that invest overseas actually lose money. So please don't just go out there and think that you're going to have those type of successes. The only time that you'll have those type of successes is if you have the right information, and most importantly, if you deal with the right partners. And really, from my side, I'd like to just raise a toast to you. It's been a privilege and an honor to travel around the country to educate lots of South Africans. And maybe one day we'll be helping you. Thanks very much. Good luck. And most importantly, invest with confidence.
Indeed.
Cheers.